They called me the traitor. My own family. The same people who smiled at me over holiday dinners while their secret ledger, tucked away in my father's study, told the real story. At first, they whispered the word behind my back, a venomous little hiss I was supposed to pretend I didn't hear. Then they shouted it, the day they cast me out with nothing but the clothes on my back and a legacy of shame they'd cooked up just for me. They thought they had exiled me, that they'd cut out the part of the family that no longer served their purpose. But they hadn't just exiled me. They had given me the key to a locked room in their perfect, gilded mansion of a life. And inside that room was their darkest secret, a story of criminal dealings and moral rot, written in my own father's meticulous hand. They built their perfect lives on a foundation of lies, and I'm about to use their own crooked accounting to burn it all to the ground. The day I officially became a traitor was my father's 60th birthday party. It was a lavish affair, of course. Everything my family did was lavish. Our lives were just a carefully curated performance of wealth, class, and old money philanthropy. My father, Richard Blackwood, was a titan of industry, or so the magazines said. My mother, Alina, was the queen of the city's charity circuit, a woman who could raise $1 million with a single, perfectly executed gala. My brother, Leo, was their charming, handsome, and perpetually troubled son. And I was Amelia, the outlier, the quiet, serious one who had foolishly decided to build something of her own instead of just managing the empire I was born into. I'd started my own tech company from my cramped apartment a decade ago, fueled by ramen, caffeine, and a desperate need to prove I was more than just a name. And I did it. My company was my life, my passion, my creation. It was thriving, and for the first time, I felt like I had an identity separate from the suffocating weight of the Blackwood legacy. My family tolerated my little project, as they called it, with a kind of bemused condescension, like I was a kid running a lemonade stand. But that afternoon, my project suddenly became very important to them. My father pulled me into his mahogany-paneled study, flanked by my mother and a visibly agitated Leo. The air was thick with the scent of expensive scotch and tension. "Amelia," my father started, his voice leaving no room for argument, "we have a problem. Leo has made another miscalculation." A miscalculation. That's what they called it when my brother gambled away a fortune or wrapped his sports car around a century-old oak tree. I had been cleaning up Leo's miscalculations my entire life. I paid his debts, hired his lawyers, smoothed things over with his furious exes. I was the family fixer, the silent partner in maintaining the illusion of perfection. "What is it this time?" I asked, my voice flat. "It's significant," my mother said, her hand fluttering at her pearl necklace. "His new venture, the art gallery, it needs a substantial and immediate cash infusion to avoid total collapse and public embarrassment." Public embarrassment. In their eyes, that was always the real crime. Not the irresponsibility, not the waste, but the chance that the pristine facade might crack. "So," I asked, "what does this have to do with me?" I already knew, but I wanted to hear them say it. My father took a slow sip of his scotch. "Your company," he said. "It's valued quite highly now. It's time to sell. The profits would more than cover Leo's shortfall and shore up the family finances. It's the sensible thing to do." I just stared at him, dumbfounded. Sell my company? The one thing I had bled for, the only thing that was truly mine, to bail out my reckless brother for the dozenth time. The air left my lungs. "No," I said. It was a small word, but it felt like a gunshot in the silent room. "Absolutely not." My father's face hardened. "This isn't a request, Amelia. It's your duty to this family." "My duty?" A decade of resentment started bubbling to the surface. "My duty has been to be your janitor. I've cleaned up every mess this family has made. I paid for Leo's rehab. I covered your bad investment in that mining company, Dad. I did it quietly to protect the family name. But this is everything I have built. You can't ask me to burn it down just to keep Leo warm." Leo, silent until now, finally sneered, his voice dripping with entitlement. "You see, I told you. She never cared about anyone but herself. She's selfish." The hypocrisy was breathtaking, but it was my mother's words that cut the deepest. She stepped forward, her eyes as cold as ice. "We have given you everything, Amelia. A name, an education, a life of privilege. And when we ask for one thing, one sacrifice for your brother, you refuse. You are a disappointment, a traitor to this family." That was it. The word was out in the open now, sharp and ugly. The argument blew up. Voices were raised. Vicious, hateful things were said, things you can never take back. It ended with my father pointing a trembling finger at the door. "If you are not with this family, you are against it," he boomed. "Get out. You are no longer a Blackwood." I was escorted from my own father's birthday party like a common criminal. I walked past smiling guests and waiters with silver trays, my face burning with a shame I didn't deserve. They cut me off completely. My bank accounts tied to the family trust were frozen. My calls went unanswered. In one afternoon, I was an orphan. They had branded me a traitor and exiled me, all to protect the one who was truly bleeding them dry. They thought the story ended there. They were wrong. It was just the beginning. The first few weeks were a blur of lawyers and frantic financial restructuring. I managed to secure my company, separating my assets from the frozen family trust just in the nick of time. But I was wounded, adrift in betrayal. The silence from my family was a wall of ice. After a month, a cold, clinical email arrived from my father's lawyer. I could return to the house one last time, for 1 hour, to get my personal belongings. I'd be escorted by a security guard. The humiliation was the point. I walked through the cavernous halls of my childhood home like a ghost, a large guard with bored eyes trailing behind me. Everything was exactly as I'd left it, a perfect museum of a life I was no longer part of. I gathered a few boxes of books and old photos. My last stop was my father's study, the scene of my excommunication. I'd left a small, antique music box my grandmother had given me, and I wanted it back. The study was my father's sanctuary. Dark wood, leather-bound books that were never read, a faint smell of cigar smoke and power. The music box was on his massive oak desk. As I picked it up, my hand brushed against a row of decorative books on a low shelf behind the desk. They were classics, all bound in matching green leather, but one of them felt different. It didn't move. Curious, I pushed it. With a soft click, a section of the bookshelf swung inward, revealing a small, dark hole in the wall. My heart hammered against my ribs. The guard was by the door, looking out into the hall. He hadn't seen. My hands trembled as I reached inside. My fingers closed around a heavy black leather ledger, unmarked with a simple brass clasp. It felt ancient and forbidden. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, I should not have found this. This was a secret. Without a second thought, I slipped the ledger into my empty tote bag and placed the music box on top of it. I grabbed my boxes and walked out of the study without looking back. An hour later, I was back in my small apartment, the silence broken only by the frantic thumping of my own heart. For hours, I just stared at the ledger on my coffee table. Part of me wanted to throw it away, to just not know. I had my company. I had my freedom. Why invite more of their darkness into my life? But the betrayal was still a raw, open wound. What secrets were they hiding that were so important they'd cast their own daughter aside without a second thought? Finally, my anger won. I unfastened the brass clasp. The ledger creaked open, and the first page was dated 30 years ago. The handwriting was my father's, precise and controlled. At first, it looked normal, records of stocks, property, business expenses. It was dense and boring. I almost gave up. But then I saw the annotations. Tiny, coded notes in the margins. Initials next to massive numbers listed not as dollars, but as units. I flipped further and saw a section titled Project Nightingale. It detailed payments to offshore accounts for what the notes called political sanitation. It was a slush fund for blackmailing public officials. My blood ran cold. I kept reading, my breath catching in my throat. Another section, the Phoenix Fund, documented a complex money laundering scheme, funneling illicit cash through shell corporations, including, I noted with a surge of nausea, my mother's beloved charity foundation. The galas weren't just for philanthropy, they were for washing dirty money. The entries were a catalog of their sins: bribes, payoffs to cover up a hit and run, blackmail against a business rival, using his sick child as leverage. It was all there, recorded with the dispassionate precision of an accountant. My father wasn't just a shrewd businessman, he was a criminal mastermind, and this ledger was his masterpiece. Then I found the pages about my own family. I found Leo. I saw records of payments, not to rehabs, but to people instructed to keep him in a cycle of debt and dependency. My father wasn't saving him, he was managing him. He intentionally kept my brother weak and broken, a pawn he could control, a convenient excuse to demand sacrifice from others. He had orchestrated Leo's failures. And then I found myself. My name was there next to an entry about my trust fund. The notes were chilling. Amelia, independent streak, potential liability, monitor closely, assets to be used as leverage if necessary. I was never a daughter to him. I was a variable to be controlled. I closed the ledger, my hands shaking so badly I could barely refasten the clasp. The grief was gone, burned away by a rage so pure and cold it felt like a shard of ice in my heart. They hadn't just cast me out. They had used me. They had used all of us. Their entire life was a lie built on the ruin of others. They called me a traitor. But the real treason, the deep, unforgivable treason, was written on every single page of that book. They thought they were safe in their fortress of lies. They had no idea I was now standing in the armory. The first thing I did was nothing. For 3 days, I didn't open the ledger. I let the cold fury settle in my bones, hardening from a fire into something sharp. Steel. I knew I couldn't go to the police. Not yet. The ledger implicated powerful people, judges, politicians, police commissioners. A direct assault would be suicide. They would bury me and the evidence with me. No, this couldn't be a loud, messy explosion. It had to be quiet, methodical, poetic. They had built their world on secrets, and I would use those very secrets to dismantle it, brick by painstaking brick. I wouldn't use a bomb. I'd use their own blueprints to engineer a controlled demolition. My first target was their lifestyle, the endless river of cash. In the ledger, I found a slush fund codenamed the Gardener's Account, a shell corporation in the Caymans, supposedly for landscape management. In reality, it was the family's personal ATM, filled with untaxed, laundered money. It was their lifeblood. I spent a week researching financial crime enforcement. I learned about anonymous tip lines and what kind of information they took seriously. Then, I drove to a public library in a town 3 hours away and created an untraceable email address. My message was short, professional, and devastatingly specific. I posed as a disgruntled junior accountant from the offshore bank. I gave them the shell corporation's name, the account numbers, and details of 3 specific fraudulent transactions. I attached scanned, slightly altered copies of just 2 pages from the ledger, enough to be authentic, but not enough to reveal the whole book. I gave them just enough bait. Then I hit send, deleted the account, and drove home. 2 weeks later, a small headline in the financial news. Prominent offshore bank under federal investigation for tax evasion. It was their bank. My heart leaped. I had aimed a sniper rifle, not a shotgun. The first sign of trouble came in a panic text from my cousin, who was still talking to me. Your mom just canceled her annual charity gala, said something about unforeseen logistical issues. Is everything okay? I smiled. The logistics of having your primary slush fund frozen by the feds. The first brick was out. Next, I went after their social standing. The ledger had a whole section on my Uncle Robert, my mother's brother-in-law, whom my father had been blackmailing for years over a secret gambling addiction. My Aunt Carol, Robert's wife, worshipped my parents. It was time for her to see the truth. From another public computer, I typed an anonymous letter. Inside, I placed photocopies of the ledger pages detailing the blackmail, complete with my father's cruel notes. R is desperate. Squeeze for another 10%. The fallout was spectacular. My cousin gave me the play-by-play of the Sunday dinner where my aunt confronted my father, screaming, and threw a crystal water glass at his head. The alliance between the 2 families, a cornerstone of their social power, shattered. The gossip spread like wildfire. Now for the main event, Blackwood Industries, a publicly traded company which made it vulnerable. The ledger revealed its stellar profit reports were a complete fiction, inflated by faked invoices from a subsidiary. Classic corporate fraud. This time, I targeted an investigative journalist, Sarah Jenkins, a woman known for taking down corporate giants. I sent her an anonymous email, gift-wrapping the story for her with a breakdown of the fraud and copies of the faked invoices. She replied within an hour. We communicated for a week through the secure email chain. I fed her information slowly, letting her verify each piece. Meanwhile, my family was in a full-blown panic. Their money was tied up. Their social circle was imploding. And now, a reporter was asking pointed questions. They were trapped in a dark room, and I was turning on the lights, one by one. The angry voicemails started. First, my mother. Amelia, I don't know what you've done, but you are destroying this family. You are a vengeful, wicked girl. Then my father, his voice low and menacing. I know this is you. Stop this now. You have no idea the forces you're playing with. I saved them. They were trophies. They still didn't get it. They thought I was being cruel. They had no concept of justice. The final phase was the most painful, but necessary. It was for Leo. The ledger showed, in cold detail, how my father had systematically sabotaged him, paying off partners and feeding him bad stock tips, all to keep him broken and dependent. He'd sacrificed his own son for power. I couldn't send another anonymous package. Leo deserved to hear it from me. I called him. He was shocked, angry, blaming me for the family's turmoil. Leo, meet me, I said, my voice steady. Just once, I need to show you something. Then you can hate me forever, but you deserve to know the truth. He agreed. We met in a quiet park. I handed him copies of the pages about him. I watched the confusion on his face turn to disbelief, and then to a dawning, soul-crushing horror. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a pain that mirrored my own. He did this, Leo whispered, his voice cracking. All of it. All of it, I confirmed. He didn't want a son, he wanted a puppet, and I was supposed to be the one who paid to fix the strings. He broke down. Years of self-loathing, of feeling like a failure, were recontextualized in that single, horrifying moment. He wasn't a screw-up. He was a victim of his own father. The anger he directed at me, at himself, finally found its true target. And in that moment, their last and most important asset, their children's loyalty, was gone forever. The demolition was nearly complete. 2 days after Sarah Jenkins's explosive article hit the front page, Blackwood Industries, a house of cards, the call came. The stock was suspended. The SEC had launched a formal investigation. The family name was radioactive. It was my father. His voice was different. The booming authority was gone, replaced by a thin, brittle desperation. We need to talk, all of us, tonight. I have nothing to say to you, I replied, my voice cold. Please, Amelia, my mother pleaded from another extension. Please. I agreed, not for them, for me. I needed to see their faces when they finally understood. I chose a sterile meeting room at a downtown hotel. No history, no memories, just a table and 4 chairs. I arrived first. They walked in together, my father, my mother, and Leo. Leo didn't look at them. He came and sat silently beside me, a powerful gesture of allegiance. My parents looked haggard, their expensive clothes hanging off their frames. My father broke the silence. Why? He whispered. Why would you do this to your own family? My family, I replied quietly. My family is the man sitting next to me, whose life you systematically destroyed. My family is not a criminal enterprise masquerading as a pillar of the community. My mother started to sob. We did what we had to do, to protect what our ancestors built, to give you a good life. A good life? I let out a short, bitter laugh. You call this a good life? Living in a palace built on blackmail and fraud. The good life you gave Leo was a prison you designed for him. The good life you gave me was the role of janitor, cleaning up your filth until you threw me away like trash. That's a gilded cage. My father slammed his fist on the table, a flicker of the old tyrant. You have no proof. These are vicious lies. You've turned our son against us. I leaned forward, my eyes locked on his. No proof, I asked softly. I didn't bring the ledger, I was the ledger now. Let's talk about Project Nightingale or the Phoenix Fund. Let's talk about the 200,000 units wired to the Caymans on July 12, 2008 to convince a judge to drop that zoning investigation. Should I go on? I know every secret, every crime, every dirty dollar. It's all written down. The color drained from his face. The bluster, the rage, it all evaporated, leaving behind the shrunken, terrified man he truly was. He finally understood. I hadn't just found a secret. I had found the secret. My mother looked from him to me, her eyes wide with horror. "The study," she whispered. "The ledger." I gave a slow, deliberate nod. His own crooked accounting told the real story, and I made sure the right people got to read it. The SEC, the IRS, Sarah Jenkins, your entire world is coming down. And the beautiful thing is, I didn't have to lie. I just had to tell your truth. My father slumped in his chair, a broken man. My mother wept uncontrollably, not for their victims, but for themselves, for the loss of their power. I stood up. Leo stood with me. "They called me the traitor," I said, looking down at the wreckage of my parents. But the real traitors were always sitting at the head of the table. We walked out and didn't look back. The weeks that followed were a public spectacle. My father was arrested in a dawn raid, a scene that played on a loop on the national news. A stark contrast to the years of glossy magazine photos. My mother wasn't charged, but she suffered a different sentence. She became a social pariah, trapped in her mansion, a queen with no court. Blackwood Industries collapsed into bankruptcy, taking a city councilman and a few executives down with it. The name Blackwood became synonymous with disgrace. And me, I watched it all from a distance. There was no triumphant party. The victory wasn't joyful. It was quiet and heavy. It felt like cauterizing a wound, agonizing but necessary for survival. I had to cut away the infected part of my life so I could finally heal. The real prize wasn't their ruin, it was my freedom. And it was Leo's. He started real therapy. He started to build a life on his own terms. We grew closer, bonded by our shared trauma. We were the only family we had left, and for the first time, that felt like enough. I sold my company, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. It had served its purpose. It was my shield, but I no longer needed it. I used the money to move to a quiet coastal town where no one knew the name Blackwood. I bought a small house with a garden. Sometimes I think about the ledger locked away in a safe deposit box, a dark reminder of the life I escaped. It's a book of endings, but for me, it was also a book of beginnings. They called me the traitor for walking away. They were right. I did betray them. I betrayed their world of lies, their kingdom of secrets, their legacy of pain. And it was the single best thing I have ever done. My new life isn't built on crooked accounting or hidden crimes. It's small, and it's quiet, and it's real. And it's mine. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing for more. The story of family can be complicated, and sometimes finding peace means walking away. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice to protect your own well-being? Share your thoughts and your own stories in the comments below.